Our first guest this morning is who CEOs run to for property advice. David Leechiu joins us for Outlook this morning. Hi, David. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Mimi. Thank you for having me.
All right. So real estate and construction account for about 12% of our GDP. What's going on in the property sector? I mean, you look at the sector today versus pre-pandemic, and you look at the local property market versus China's property crisis. Where are we?
Well, I think as far as China crisis is concerned, it doesn't seem like it's going to impact us in any way because outside the POGOs sector, there are very few Chinese investors in the Philippines and relatively very few tourists coming to the Philippines from China, even though China is the largest tourism market of the Philippines today, but there's such a low base relative to from their perspective that I don't think it's meaningful. They're not lending to the banks here. They don't own property. They're not leveraged. So I think in a way we will be insulated from the havoc that's going to do, at least directly. Indirectly, it might cause interest rates to rise throughout the world if that problem becomes bigger and bigger. But I think that's just going to propel more offshoring to the Philippines if ever that happens. So far, 24 months of COVID and property prices continue to remain resilient. The BPO industry continues to grow. 40% increase in office leasing activity and new leases taken up. 2020 compared to 2021, so that's a very good sign. I think the BPO industry will continue to grow aggressively in 2022, and despite work from home and despite the unexpected, I would say, delays that Omicron has produced, 99% of tenants continue to pay their rent and renew their leases for another 5 to 7 years. So it's a very strong sign of stability. Despite all the fears about companies saying that they don't need the office anymore, the reality is that more and more of our tenants want to be back in the office. And some will do so faster than others. And these are the facts. We have to thank the President and the Secretary of Finance, Secretary Dominguez, for really, despite what the politicians say, they really have steered this country through this COVID crisis in a great way. And despite all this, what do the numbers show and what do the real achievements show is that nobody has done the amount of infrastructure projects completed as this administration has done. And that has been a significant boom for the property market, not just in Metro Manila, but all over the Philippines. One very good example is that there have been something like 480 mini ports or like these really, really small mini ports that have been completed throughout the country. And a lot of, when you see the pictures, you don't really appreciate the impact of these small mini ports. But these mini ports change the lives of fishermen, of common folk, of the ordinary Filipino that are trying to make a living throughout the country from the sea. And whether it's trade or direct fishermen or just transport from home to school on the mainland, all these things have transformed millions and millions of lives for Filipinos. And that's just one example. And the fact that we were able to borrow significant amounts of money in the last 24 months to address the problems of COVID is another sign of how well our country has been managed fiscally. Those are the facts. And unfortunately, there's a lot of politicizing going on, and I think we all have to try to look past the politics to see the real value of what has been done for this country. And it's been amazing.
David, you're sounding very optimistic, but you know what, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If the property market is really in such a great shape, I'm very curious, could you give us an idea, what were the top deals closed last year? What are the values, what are the sizes, and what's in store for this year? Are they jaw-dropping as in previous years?
Yeah, so I think there are still problems. So as optimistic as I may sound, I'm not bullish. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think a lot of people were very eager to see the economy open, and we did open it up. And that's why in the last 2 weeks of December and the first 2 weeks of January, Omicron just surprised all of us. But I think, you know what? It's not just my optimism, but I get the optimism from a lot of people who got sick in the last 3 weeks and who are now recovering. And you know what they're saying? They're saying, wow, now that I've recovered from this and it's mild, and I'm probably, in addition to my vaccines, I'm also somewhat immune. They're so eager to go out again. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm not saying to people, now that you've recovered, please go out. I'm not saying that, but the people refuse to be defeated by this virus, and that human spirit is what's going to propel the economy forward. Now, the lower end of the market, of the property market, has been decimated really badly. That's where a lot of the foreclosures have happened. That's where the bad debts have happened. That's where landlords and sellers needed to give better terms to buyers and tenants just to accommodate the loss of jobs, the loss of bonuses, the loss of the pay cuts. But the upper middle market and above continue to do well. Dasma and Forbes continue to increase in value. They've gone up 5%. Ayala Alabang has gone up 50%. Punta Fuego and the entire Batangas Bay are up 200 to 300% depending on the value in the last 24 months. Anvaya Cove, 100% in the last 24 months. And it's not just here. You look at Iloilo. Iloilo has been the darling of the BPO sector. It is the second biggest recipient of office leasing activity in 2021 and 2020, right? After Bonifacio and Makati. And never would that have happened. And just imagine how the BPO industry is transforming Iloilo. There are two O's that surprised the Philippines: the Omicron and Odette. So O and O. But as soon as we overcome this O and O wave, and I think, although we're still far from normal in Cebu, which is the hardest hit district, but I think it's made meaningful progress in the last 2 weeks. And so, how does that go forward? Well, I think humanity as a whole is trying to figure things out, and they're trying to get their balance already. A lot of governments in the West are thinking, you know what? Omicron gave us a chance. It's infected a lot of people, but it's mild, and it's given us a chance to go back to the streets again and be back in the economy. And that's just going to drive economic activity further. And I think that mentality is going to be adopted throughout the world. And that's complemented with the massive vaccinations.
David, you mentioned Iloilo. Are there new areas emerging as darlings, just like Iloilo?
Yes, Bohol has been quietly picking up new demand, and unfortunately, they wiped out all office space in Bohol. So it will take time to build capacity, but tenants want to go to Bohol as an overspill from Cebu. And traveling through the Visayas is magic because you've got a fantastic new airport in Cebu, you've got a fantastic new airport in Bohol, you've got a fantastic airport in Iloilo, and it just improves the confidence level in many of these territories. And yes, again, Odette kind of set these airports back because there's some physical damage to the structures, but we're going through the repairs right now. And so, yeah, I think besides Bohol, there's Dumaguete, there's a revival for Dumaguete, there's a revival for Ilocos Norte and Lawag. And so we've been dealing with Senator Aimee, who's doing such a fantastic job with her and her family in managing that province and that city, and there's Tarlac, and of course Clark. Clark is going to be the new Cebu of the BPO sector and the new Iloilo, because we think in 2022, in 2023, a lot of demand is going to go to Clark.
BPOs are now the main driver for demand for these spaces. What about POGOs? I remember late last year, your expectation was POGOs would start to come back at the start of this year. We're in January. Have they started to come back?
In a bit, yes, because there's a lot of instability right now in terms of how China is treating its tourists, meaning there's a lot of capital flight out of China and through venues like Macau and Hong Kong, and the government is clamping on that. It's not specific to the POGO sector, although it includes the POGO sector. They're also culling the amount of traffic of outbound Chinese to prevent further infections, because they have this zero tolerance for COVID. And so that combination is slowing down the expansion of the POGO industry. Borders were opening up, which allowed foreign workers to come back to the Philippines. But because of Omicron, those borders are being compromised again. I do think... Yeah.
But aren't these POGOs, haven't they gone to other countries like Vietnam, for example, and set up shop there? It's not going to be very easy and fast to uproot and then move back in, right?
Well, fortunately, the cost of mobility for them is a small component, because ultimately they will go where their labor market wants to go. And yes, they've gone to Dubai, but the feedback, this is not me saying it, but the feedback from the labor market of the POGO sector is that they find Dubai the climate is too different from them, the culture is too different for them, things are just too small compared to what they can do here in the Philippines. They have a bit more liberty in the Philippines as against, let's say, places like Dubai or Eastern Europe, like Poland. So certain parts of South Russia, and so they still like the Philippines for some, for some funny reason. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about REITs, real estate investment trust vehicles. How big of a potential are you seeing for REITs? Right now, a lot of the REITs are focused on office spaces. Eventually, it's going to move into, I imagine, energy assets and industrial warehousing. Double Dragon is going to be launching the country's first industrial warehousing REIT in the second half of this year. Are you bullish? What sort of potential do you see?
Yeah, I guess Mr. Injap and Mr. Tony Tan Katyong has never failed to surprise people. And so I think I'm quite optimistic about the way their REIT is going to do. Their third listing during COVID, it's kind of insane. You think that it's kind of unthinkable to see how well the property market is doing. Well, you also have to consider the amount of listings that the Philippines was able to do during COVID. We're one of the few countries with this much listings. And those listings have done really, really well. I mean, you look at how the Mega World REIT has done, you look at how the Ayala REIT has done, or the Robinson REIT has done. It's been fantastic for investors and for the sponsors. And you have to think, how is that possible through COVID, despite a 10% contraction in the economy in 2020 and the modest economic growth we had in 2021? So I think that these are the things that have to remind us that the future is going to look brighter. In addition to that is the increase in confidence from the increasing vaccination and the booster efforts, plus the pills that are going to be made available to the Philippines, hopefully earlier rather than later, hopefully in the second quarter of this year as it rolls out in the West. So all these things are going to do very well for property and for the stock market. And so REITs have been the best of both worlds, the property market and the stock market. And like what we've been saying all along, what people like Edward Lee and Wilson C. and all these other fantastic investors in the stock market have been saying is that you will get the best of property and the best of stocks in REITs. And so REITs need to be part of the everyday person's portfolio if they want to be successful financially.
Okay, David, final question. This is what everyone's waiting for. What's your top property investment tip? For those who want to win in this market, how should they play the property market?
They have
what
to
should
have
they
BGC.
look at? Where should they look at? They have to have what? BGC.
They have to have Bonifacio in their portfolio. They have to have Bonifacio because it's the safest place to invest in the Philippines. Then they have to have some kind of land bank. When they have enough recurring income assets, they have to have some kind of land bank. And the best land bank, I think, would be Palawan. Because Palawan will be the best tourism play for Philippines. I think tourism will be the biggest industry of the Philippines within 10 years or less. And I think we have to have a place, some kind of hold in Palawan, whether you buy a coffee shop there, or you buy a plot of land, or a piece of a hotel, or a piece of a condo building. Palawan would be my top bet. And of all these places, the Leechiu project of Ayala is I think the most sustainable investment vehicle for tourism in the Philippines.
All right. On that note, David, thank you so much for joining us. I guess I'll see you in Palawan.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll see you. Thank you for joining us.